Save on your next oil change at O'Reilly Auto Parts. Choose Castrol Edge Full Synthetic Motor Oil to provide maximum performance and protection for your engine. Get a $15 gift card after rebate when you buy 5 quarts of Castrol Edge for $34.95. Plus 2 times O Rewards points. Offer valid in-store and online at O'ReillyAuto.com.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles.
Chase Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse.
Hearing about Mr. Pointless in fantasy this
And Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
It's week 1. It's time for Operation Domination. Live on our Wednesday night special at 9:30. You're going to catch us here every single week of the year. Live on the Fantasy Football Advice Network on YouTube. Thanks for joining into the show. If you're ever on the go, especially during the week, we are available on every podcast app for you. All right. All you have to do, download us on your favorite podcast app, Operation Domination Football, to make sure you're getting the best content possible, because week 1 is here. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Cannot wait. Less than 24 hours away from our big game tomorrow. So what do we have in store for you? Well, you're going to get a taste of what we're going to be giving you, because we're going to give you a little bit of everything in this episode. And that's how we're going to treat you all throughout the season. A little bit of everything so you can do anything for Operation Domination in fantasy football. That's what it's all about. I'm Dan Mader, joined here with Chase Thornton, Adam LaRue, and Chris Dowhower here. Live, boys. We got to get it. Let's dive right into it, because we got some breaking news to talk about. Oh, Jamar Chase returned to practice, and he doesn't officially have a contract.
Oh.
How about that? What do we make of that? Chris, what do you think? Jamar Chase returns, he comes in. You think he's going to play this Sunday? I mean, he's still listed as questionable. They're still not exactly sure. Even if he does, how confident are you in him this week? Go.
Yeah, I wouldn't be super confident. I mean, this looks all the makings to me right now of reporting. I don't want to get fined, and so I can be there and then see what happens. We've seen something similar kind of happen. We probably went to Adam on this one with Jonathan Taylor happening last year. It has a lot of vibe to that, where it's like, we don't want to get rid of you. We're not going to trade you. We're not really sure if we're going to pay you yet. So come on in, but let's see if you actually play. So I'm not super confident about playing Jamar Chase unless he gets a contract signed.
I feel like if you drafted him, though, you're going to know if he's going to be active by Sunday, right? That's the whole idea. I feel like if he's active by Sunday and you drafted him, I don't see how you're not going to play him this upcoming week. Well, let's hope he's actually active and available. On the flip side of this, Adam, because I was in a draft with you where you did draft Jamar Chase in the first round, you did so know there was a chance he might not play week 1. Would you not have a backup option already ready to go?
Yeah, I think you had to stack a little bit deep at wide receiver, and look, that was a draft where I took a lot of guys who I felt comfortable filling in for that option. Look, I think this is a case of, Cincinnati's going to find a way to pay him. I think they're pretty probably open about that with him, and they're figuring it out, kind of similar to what you're going through with Trent Williams right now. Obviously, it's a fantasy show. But
Trent Williams has a contract. It's not the same thing.
But for a few days, he came back to practice before the contract was finalized, because they were still figuring out the logistics. But they're like, all right, we're going to do it. We're figuring out logistics. Give it a second. But all right, we're sorted. So I think it's going to end up being a similar situation where, they're going to have a come to Jesus moment, but it might take a minute to actually, get the money. I mean, they're selling TVs out of the freaking Cincinnati Bengals stadium right now. So they're working on money. All right.
Bring them in the back, push them out the front. There we go.
If you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you better hope Mike Brown has a come to Jesus moment, because this could get real ugly if not. But I do think you're right. Eventually, this contract does get done. Either way, good news to Jamar Chase back at practice. Let's dive into our first segment. We got the DFS cocktail. Look at that, baby. I'm thirsty already, Chase. We're walking through, man. We got some DFS and some cocktails we're going to talk about to kick off the show.
All right. No, that's right. Now we're going to put together, putting together a good DFS lineup is like putting together a good cocktail. Okay. You got to have the right mix of ingredients. You got to have good balance. You have to have something that you're going to use for your base, your base philosophy there, as it were. So we're going to start with this one off today. We're going to be making a Wisconsin brandy old-fashioned sour. Now, most of you out there here, old-fashioned, you think whiskey. Here in Wisconsin, we like to do it with brandy, okay? And so, as the name implies, it's a brandy old-fashioned. The base for this cocktail is going to be brandy. And so, the brandy in this DFS cocktail for us this week is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. We're going to build around them for our DFS this week. Why, you ask? Well, if you take a look at the Vegas lines here, when I looked earlier today on Sharp Football, they had Jacksonville at Miami listed at 49 for an over-under. That's one of the highest totals of the entire week, okay? Now, Miami is a 3.5-point favorite, but what that says to me is if Miami's ahead, Jacksonville's going to have to keep playing offense to catch up and keep passing. Miami, not a great defense. They lost a couple guys from last year. So I like the idea of Jacksonville having to pass to keep up with what we know is a high octane offense on the other side in the Miami Dolphins. So right now on DraftKings, you can get Trevor Lawrence for $6,200. We're going to put him in our quarterback slot, and that's going to be part of our brandy base on that. Okay. So then we want to pair him with at least one of his receivers. I'm going to go with Christian Kirk at 5,500. Christian Kirk's a guy that I've been on all off season in the lead up to the season here. I like his matchup here against the Miami Dolphins secondary, and I like him to go for high target volume, high reception volume here with Lawrence. So that's going to be part of our brandy. Now, I like to also add a third player from them. I want to take one of their other two wide receivers, but I want to throw this to you guys and ask you guys what your thoughts are. So, Chris, let's start with you here for our second receiver off of the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Are we going to lean more towards Gabe Davis at 4,500 or Brian Thomas at 4,700? I know where I'm leaning, but I want to know what your thoughts are. Thomas or Davis, would you be more comfortable with?
So I'm probably against the green on this one, Chase. I'm going to go with Gabe Davis. I think Gabe Davis is a guy who's kind of forgotten about because everybody is just soured on what happened in Buffalo. But he comes to a situation in Jacksonville where he's going to be playing in the receiver position where he gets moved around a lot. You saw Zay Jones be a guy who saw a lot of targets. I think Gabe Davis is a lot more talented than Zay Jones. 2 years ago, you saw Marvin Jones have a similar role. So it's a guy that's going to have a red zone role, but also a guy that can be able to look for between the 20s. Brian Thomas is still only runs about 3 routes. They'd be big plays, but I think Gabe Davis is the guy that I would rely on.
Okay. Dan, do you have a rebuttal for that one at all, or where are you leaning on Davis and Thomas?
It's funny that you went with this because this is actually one of my top lineups that I'm playing this week in DFS, where I got Trevor Lawrence, I have Christian Kirk, I have Tyreek Hill, and then I followed it up with Brian Thomas at 4,700. Look, Gabe Davis can run the treadmill with the best of them. That's just what he does, okay? He's going to go out there, he's going to block, he's going to run his cardio routes, but the guy who's actually dynamic, the first-round talent, is Brian Thomas. So I'm anticipating more of the big plays heading his way, plus he's more likely – now, Jalen Ramsey's hurt, so maybe this doesn't even want to be a thing. I don't know, but – it's more likely that Brian Thomas is not going to be lining up on Jalen Ramsey. It would be way they line up. It would be Gabe Davis more often, given the statistics from last season where Ramsey lined up compared to Gabe Davis. If that winds up being true for Jacksonville, for Gabe Davis, it is. So we'll have to see. But Ramsey's he didn't practice, so maybe it winds up being all for naught. I don't know. But for $4,700, Brian Thomas, first round pick, brought in there. They've been talking about. He's been brought in there to run the Calvin Ridley role. Calvin Ridley role was to be a deep threat. Ridley was out of position. It's right up Brian Thomas's alley. So for me, it's Brian Thomas at 4,700.
All right. We've got conflicting views there. I'm going to play tiebreaker on this one. Dan, you make a great point. And I think if we're talking 3-4 weeks from now, I probably agree with you. But week one, I'm going to go with Gabe Davis. I'm going to follow Chris's lead here. Gabe Davis at 4,500 there, just being the veteran here and knowing what's going on week one. I know he's new to the offense, just like Brian Thomas is, but he's a veteran in the league. I like him better week one. And it gives us a little bit more flexibility with our build here with $200 extra.
Chase, real quick, before you move on, we got a question coming in from Diego. Start Curtis Dobbs or Cortland Sutton in week one. For me, it is Cortland Sutton all the way. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, he's the number one on his team. He's the hands down number one on his team.
Yeah, I mean, Dobbs, you're dealing with target share issues. Curtis Samuel's banged up. We're not exactly sure how that target distribution is going to break down. To me, if Cortland Sutton's the only one on there, we know, and it's week one, and we know he's going to be getting the ball before everybody else in that passing attack, even if it's not a great passing attack. So it seemed to be all on the same page with that. All right, Chase, take it away.
All right, so we've got our base, we've got our brandy, our 3 players from the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to add a little bit of a sweetener here. Our sweetener on this deal is going to be Kenneth Walker, running back from the Seattle Seahawks at 6,100 here now. I really like the idea of him at home. They're favored. They're actually pretty decent favorites at home against Denver Broncos. I like the idea of Walker in that new offense there, really being able to churn out some yards, eat up some clock, score some points down in the red zone. I like what Kenneth Walker has to offer this week. I think he's going to be a really good play there at 6,100 for like a sweetener on the deal, like I said. But then when you're building a cocktail, you need balance. And so to balance that sweetness, we got to add some bitters. We're going to be adding some Angostura bitters in here. And the bitters, or the balance that we're going to add to this cocktail, is Jalen Waddle. You went with Tyreek Hill, you said, when you played the other at Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to add Jalen Waddle on this one. He's a little bit cheaper than Tyreek. Tyreek Hill is coming off the board here at 8,700 this week. Waddle is 6,300, but we're going to put Waddle in there. That's our third receiver, and that balances us out in that shootout, where if we do have a shootout and they are playing back and forth, we expect that the pass catchers on the other side would be doing well as well. So we're going to take Waddle from that. Then we're going to, have to have a float on top. And my float, like I said, we're making a sour cocktail. We're not making a sweet cocktail. We're not making a spritz or a smash. We're making a sour cocktail. So the sour in this one, which is going to, again, add some balance there. We're going to go with the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to put Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts in our lineup. I like the idea of these two going at it. I like, Bijan being able to kind of stick it to, forget Arthur Smith on the other side. And I like the idea of them being able to throw to Kyle Pitts there all day long. I have a feeling they're going to be concentrated. They're going to be concentrating on Drake London. They're going to have to concentrate on the box on Bijan Robinson. I have a feeling that Kyle Pitts could run wild this week. So he's going to play our tight end position there. The only thing then we have left to do, we got to talk about our defense, and then we're going to put a garnish on this at the flex position. The garnish is where I'm going to come back to you guys. For my defense in this one, I'm picking Seattle. We already talked about it. They're big favorites at home. They're facing a rookie quarterback on the other side there. I really like the idea of the Seattle defense this weekend. But now, for the garnish, before we actually mix this cocktail up in front of you here, and I have something to drink for the day, we are left with about $5,700 from that build. So we've got a good selection here for people we can throw on here at the flex and garnish. I like to flex a running back, but there are some intriguing options here at the wide receiver position too. So we've got the possibility of Najee Harris at 5,600, Zamir White at 57, Devin Singletary at 57, Javonte Williams, although he's against that Seattle defense, we're playing at 55, or Jerome Ford at 55. Those guys are all running backs we could choose. Zamir White, Singletary, Najee, Javonte Williams, and Ford, or there is the possibility of putting Terry McLaurin at 5,600 in there, or Pickens 5,700 to kind of balance out the two Falcons that we're using. So we'll start with you, Adam, because we didn't go to you for the debate on the Jacksonville Jaguars there. Who would you be garnishing this with in the flex? Would you be going with one of the running backs there, or are you going, say, like a McLaurin or a Pickens there?
I think for me, I want to go Terry McLaurin. I think it's a pretty solid matchup. This isn't a secondary I'm very afraid of. I think Jaden Daniels could very easily hyper target his primary option here. First NFL game, just keep it simple, stupid. And just on the whole, Terry McLaurin, I think it's a good matchup. That's the route I want to go.
If we put Terry McLaurin in our starting lineup, that leaves us only with $100, which means we spent our budget pretty darn well. Dan, Chris, either of you have anything you want to say about that garnish? Would you be going a different direction, or do you guys like the idea of Terry McLaurin in that flex spot?
I literally have Terry McLaurin in that team that I named, where we have a similar stack going on right now, and I'm gonna have to talk about Terry McLaurin later, so I don't want to get too much into it.
No, good choice. Like I said, normally I like to go, if you're playing a cash game, you're playing a 50-50 game, I like to go a little more conservative. I would normally be putting a running back in that position. But with Terry McLaurin and how well I think he's going to play this year and this week specifically as well, I like putting him in there as well. Like I said, that leaves us only $100 left in our budget. So that means we've done it. We can make our actual cocktail now. So to make a Wisconsin brandy old fashioned, we are going to take some orange simple syrup that I have made there. Now, some people will tell you should put a sugar cube in there and mush it up. If you want to do that, that's fine, but you have to kind of grind a little longer. It takes a while for it to actually dissolve, or you've got a gritty cocktail. If that doesn't bother you, put a sugar cube in there. There's that. Some people will tell you should muddle a cherry in there. Don't muddle a cherry in there. It's just going to make a bunch of mush. When you muddle, you're not trying to juice the thing or mulch it. You're just trying to mush it up a little bit. You're trying to express the oils, express the juice a little bit. So there's that. Then we're going to put our ice in there. We're going to pour our brandy. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes, that's about a 2.5 ounce pour there. I'm from Wisconsin. I pour them heavy. The rest of you got to catch up, okay? So there's our brandy. We are going to splash some bitters in there. I like heavy bitters in there as well, but that's to taste. We're going to put our float on top there. I'm using Squirt because it's a sour. You can use sour mix. Some people will use sweet, so they'll go with Sprite, but go with sour. And then for the garnish, here's a scoop of Terry McLaurin going in the top there. 2 scoops of Terry McLaurin. I like to put some of the juice in there from the, we're using Luxardo cherries. We're not using those bright red ones that you find at the ice cream parlor on your sundae. But there we have a Wisconsin brandy old-fashioned sour like you'll find in any of the fine establishments here in the state. And I have something to drink, so the rest of y'all can do what you got to do, because I'm going to enjoy this.
And that's $1 million cocktail right there. Guess what time it is now for? That's right. It's domination defense time. Chris, who's our dominating defense of the week?
Dan, I'm just excited to talk about defense. I know everybody talks on fantasy. We forget about the defenses. They're just always write them off. But the defense scores points too, fellas. And the defense that I like this week, Chase, I like the Seattle defense. Not a bad play, but I'm going to go with the New Orleans Saints defense taking on the Carolina Panthers. The New Orleans Saints played the Carolina Panthers twice last year, had 4 sacks in both games, held them to 6 points the one game. They had 17 points the second game, but it scored 11 in the fourth quarter. It was almost a miracle for the Panthers, basically. This offense is not going to be that much better yet this year. The Saints defense, it wasn't that great last year and was able to dominate them. And then the year before, they also dominated them. The Saints owned the Panthers in New Orleans. I love New Orleans at home. I love New Orleans defense to dominate this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the play last year was to always play any defense playing the Carolina Panthers. We'll see if that changes. I don't know if that's going to change too much. We're going to take a quick break. We come back on the other side. We got offensive observations for you, so stay tuned. We are here. FantasySportsAdvice.com, offering the best fantasy sports social media platform. Why join endless Discord communities or the trolls of Reddit? Fantasy Sports Advice is a community designed to help you win with 24/7 support. Go to FantasySportsAdvice.com and become a pro member for unlimited access. Again, go to FantasySportsAdvice.com today.
You find me offensive, I find you offensive for finding me offensive.
Oh, man. I can't wait for this, Chris. Who we spouting off at?
Well, Dan, we're not just spouting off. We're going to talk about offense, because offensive observations isn't always just about spouting off, but I will start off with my spout off to get us started for the segment. So we all got an opportunity to go to the Fantasy Football Expo, and we all shared a room crazily. We all weren't in that room most of the weekend, but while we were there, we were coming in and out watching some preseason football. And the great David Carr was on NFL Network breaking down one of the games that I got the chance to overhear about him talking about how Sean Payton is going to the college game and is now changing his playbook and revamping everything he's ever done in his past and bringing a brand new offense to Denver for a Bo Nix to be able to utilize his legs. And he's going to be using something called the RPO action and a spread offense. Something he never did in New Orleans. Something he's never done anywhere else. An offense that we've never seen before, but we have. In fact, we didn't just see it in New Orleans. We saw it last year. We watched Russell Wilson run around last year for the first 2 weeks of the season. We watched different guys. Russell Wilson actually was QB 2, week 2. We'll get to that in a little bit. But you look at a different offense that we have schemes, Dan, and we hear these schemes talk about what people are going to do or what they're not going to do. So I know a lot of people assume that they know football. I know a lot of people think that when it comes to fantasy, we only need to know certain things. But I think it's important for us to kind of differentiate. And I want to use some of your expert knowledge for each of you to kind of help people understand schemes and what we have to kind of look at in these schemes when we're talking about them. So, Dan, I'm going to kick off with you, and I'm going to talk about one of the schemes that we've heard a lot about, this Kyle Shanahan scheme. There's also the Sean McVay scheme. There's Kevin O'Connell's scheme. There's Zach Taylor's scheme. Now, Dan, what's the difference to you in these different schemes when all these different guys are all getting jobs throughout the league? And we're going to see an opportunity maybe in Tennessee, for example, or we're going to see in Atlanta, new coaches taking over, offensive coordinators, I should say, taking over and calling plays. What are we looking at with these schemes when we're talking about these different coaches, and what kind of differentiates those guys in your eyes?
Well, I mean, the difference in the scheme itself, it's the modern day West Coast offense, first and foremost, but there's two different versions of it. And we've talked about this numerous times, especially behind the scenes. You have the Mike Shanahan version of this offense where, yes, you have the zone running scheme. You have the versatility on the outside, but you also have the levels of the passing attack. And basically what happened is that he had his son, Kyle Shanahan, and he had his protege, Sean McVay, and they split the system into two different versions. Sean McVay using this more as a let's go 3 wide to attack the levels off of play action, pass first type of offense. Kevin O'Connell's followed that in suit. Bobby Slowick, who funny enough came from the Shanahan tree, is following the Sean McVay suit as well, coming from a similar derivative of it. But then from Kyle Shanahan, we have Mike McDaniel down in Miami, where they have adopted more of the run approach aspects of those systems and passing out of their run formations. But all in all, it's ultimately attacking levels, using zone schemes to run, using play action, and most importantly, using motion, aka the modern day West Coast offensive system. That's what you're really looking at when we're talking about these coaches have been getting these jobs from these schemes.
Awesome. So, Addo, to kind of follow up with that, if I'm looking at Cincinnati this year, and there's a lot of talk about them using Jamar Chase differently if he actually does report to camp, looking at him being moved around more, what's the difference between how Zach Taylor had been running his offense versus what they're looking to do now with a wrinkle, maybe moving him a little bit more around?
Yeah, I think it keeps defenses off balance a little bit more if they're able to move him around. I think, look, you get a lot of space working from the slot. You don't have guys in press. You're able to get against nickel corners who, look, a lot of them are you're sacrificing a little bit in terms of speed and in terms of having that perimeter, corner that's the lockdown guy for a guy who, all right, if I run off the edge, I trust you to tackle the ball. That's what you're doing a lot of the times with your nickel corners, the guy that, is playing over the slot. And now some defenses, that's why, players like Jalen Ramsey are so impactful, right? The guy who actually will travel to the slot when you have a really powerful player, in that slot position versus the guys who they stay on the outside. That's really impactful, and you can do a lot, covering guys out there. But you can just hide that player from the corner, moving him over the inside. And I think that's going to be, really good for the Cincinnati offense if they do that. And if they're able to, instill being under center a little bit more on the Cincinnati offense, I think that this offense has genuinely, I know, they were a 30-plus passing touchdown offense 2-3 years ago. There's a lot of room for improvement for this offense if they're able to literally just do those two things.
Can you give me like an example of another offense that maybe runs a similar system or how to use that receiver?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to look at usage rates as far as actually moving their perimeter guy.
I think for myself, real quick, as Minnesota is the example I'm kind of looking at, where Justin Jefferson, we see his usage being able to be kind of guy who's in the slot. They're moved around different ways versus kind of stagnant, standing in one spot. A guy that, Chase, that maybe we saw kind of had an example that blew up for him was CeeDee Lamb last year, where he's moved all around. Now we hear a lot about 12 personnel and teams going to 12 personnel. So we have the Carolina Panthers are going to 12 personnel. Are they going to have Deontay Johnson become CeeDee Lamb now? Or are we going to see something different possibly? Or even Buffalo, they're running a lot of 12 personnel with Joe Brady. What's the difference between the 12 personnel offenses in your eyes?
I think 12. 12
Well, I'm skipping over you, Adam. I'm going to Chase. I'm sorry.
I didn't hear you say that. Sorry.
12 personnel in Buffalo or in Carolina?
Well, yeah, like if I'm looking at these different teams are running all the different personnel groupings and the teams that, they're running these 3 receiver sets, and I want to target some of these 3 receivers, am I going to look for the guy that's, which offenses am I looking at in the 3 receivers if I look at, all the different teams? So, for example, I was asking Adam about CeeDee Lamb being, the guy, example, like blowing up because he got moved all around the formation. Well, Dallas ran a lot of 3 receiver sets. Is that something I can assume that Carolina is going to do now that they're running 3 receiver sets?
Yeah, I mean, you can assume that, I think Deontay Johnson's going to be a target monster anyway, whether they run 2 receiver sets or 3 receiver sets. He's got to be, because he's hands down their best receiver that they have over there. If you're going to try and target, say, 1 receiver on an offense like that or like Buffalo, honestly, I probably want to go a direction more like Carolina and target a Deontay Johnson, because I think that he's going to be the clear guy to eat in that role. We saw that the other receivers on Dallas last year, to bring up your CeeDee Lamb example, they didn't, outside of Jake Ferguson, the rest of them kind of struggled a little bit. We didn't see great years out of any of them, but CeeDee Lamb had a historic season. And I think that Deontay Johnson can't reach those kind of heights partially because he doesn't have Dak Prescott as his quarterback. But, Deontay Johnson is going to be the guy there. And if they do move him around, they do use him like the Cowboys use CeeDee Lamb, that's an offensive guy that I would target all day long, because I think he's going to be able to eat. Whereas over in Buffalo, we don't necessarily know who's going to be the number 1 over there yet. And they've got a couple of guys. They've got Khalil Shakir, who we think should run out of the slot a bit. We think Curtis Samuel should be running out of the slot. Keon Coleman is there, and everybody's excited for him, but we don't really know who's going to be that number 1. We don't really know if these guys are going to be moved around and used in quite the same way. So, if you're looking at targeting an offense like that, I think going in a direction like a Deontay Johnson is a good fit.
Okay, so how about you, Dan, real quick? I looked at somebody like Seattle last year. Now, JSN was a slot receiver, and he just didn't really do anything for me that I was hopeful. I was expecting something out of him. What am I looking at differently? Is it something different? And even in Tampa Bay, where Chris Godwin not had a great year, I don't forget the slot receiver was Mike Evans was awesome. Am I looking necessarily for that slot receiver in these offenses, or there could be something different between maybe a Dave Canales offense and maybe a Joe Brady offense?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all about the scheme. It's not necessarily about the position that the receiver plays. You know what I mean? And how those different positions, especially when it comes to the wide receivers, get featured within that coach's offense. I mean, if you look at Kellen Moore, we had years with CeeDee Lamb, and he had, last year with Keenan Allen. He has built an offense to feature around that slot receiver. He's built an offense to attack that middle portion of the field. Now, when you talk about guys who maybe weren't as successful at it, you mentioned JSN. A couple of things there. JSN was a rookie, and there, Geno Smith didn't play as well. Ryan Grubb's system is more built to be a true 3-receiver set system. Shane Waldron's is not, which is why I think it's going to be kind of curious when we get up to Chicago. Shane Waldron and Joe Brady are kind of cut from the same cloth in some senses, where, they play a lot of 3-receiver sets, but it's really built around kind of maximizing the run and being able to block on the outside. And it is actually featuring the different wide receivers. And what they do it is they do a play action, and they usually take shots down the field to their perimeter receivers. That's why DK Metcalf does so well. It's why Tyler Lockett for years did as well as he did. It's why we think Rome Odunze is going to probably outperform Keenan Allen, or at least Chris and I do anyway. So it's a different scenario depending upon, you may have the same personnel groupings, but how these coaches feature these different systems. What is their system built to do? In Ryan Grubb's situation, I don't know it's going to be that much different than what we saw with Shane Waldron, in the sense of he runs a 3-receiver set. But if you look at his time in Washington, it was more built around featuring the perimeter wide receiver, not necessarily the slot receiver. That's why we saw, Jalen Polk and, of course, Rome Odunze, who's a freak in himself, and you're always going to feature him. But Polk played the other outside. Polk wound up being a second-round pick because of the production he put up in Washington. So that's kind of what he featured there. So that's why I'm not as big on JSN this year. So a lot of that goes in those directions.
Awesome. All right, Adam. So I'm going to go to you real quick for this last scheme question. And let's talk about RPO action that I kind of kicked off with everything with. And what we're looking at when offenses are, kind of explosive with using a lot of that RPO action versus kind of stagnant. So what jumps out to my mind, for example, is I watched the Eagles. Jalen Hurts used RPO. They ran RPOs last 10 games of the season. The offense got worse and worse and worse, and I watched my fantasy production go down and down, versus what I watched Shane Steichen in Colts offense, adapt to their quarterback, able to use Gardner Minshew. But if Richardson was out there, they're able to kind of utilize him, all different formations, different things they were kind of utilizing. But it was mostly RPO kind of is a baseball on the offense. So when it comes to RPO, what are you looking for, Adam, that kind of stands out for you versus, makes a good RPO action versus kind of like, the old Chip Kelly offense where they weren't doing anything?
Yeah, I think the number one key is whether or not it's predictable. Look, I think the biggest difference between what Sirianni and company were doing in Philadelphia last year and what was happening in Indianapolis is that Indianapolis had honestly one of the lower numbers of formations run, especially once they moved on to Gardner Minshew, and even with Richardson, right? I mean, this is a young quarterback, and then this is a quarterback who came in that season, right? They did a lot of things out of a smaller number of formations, right? There were a ton of route concepts that they could run as far as RPO, as well as obviously having a real rushing threat. And what happened in Philadelphia was, regardless of the formation, they didn't differ their route concepts that they were running with RPO all that often. They were running a lot of the same crap. They might make it look a little bit different, but the actual routes being run were not really that different in the grand scheme of things from a play-to-play basis. And they would get away from the run when things went bad in some of these games, right? So you combine both of those things, it was a lot easier to see that RPO coming versus in Indianapolis where they were sticking with the run and where they were running a lot of different guys would be the primary receiving target on that RPO. We saw a month stretch where Josh Downs was getting like 10 targets a week, and then that went away, and we're back to Pittman. And then suddenly we're throwing to Granson is getting a ton of targets out of nowhere, and then we're back to Pittman again. Versus just, all right, we're going to try to go deep to A.J. Brown. Otherwise, we're going to go to Devonta Smith or my tight end short, and that's all we're going to do all season long. So I just think it's variance. It's running it in different ways and keeping teams off guard, because the RPO is something that can really devastate a defense when you're catching them off guard. But realistically, if you're sticking to your fundamentals and you expect it to happen, it's not like the hardest thing in the world for a defense to realistically stop.
So we're going a little extra here, so I want to kind of wrap it up with this last kind of points. So, you guys did an awesome job breaking down the scheme, and it's something I'm going to continue to kind of go throughout the rest of the season, whether it's good or positive or negative, that we think things that jump out to us that we kind of want to take to you, help you understand what you're seeing on, on Sunday, or now we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So we get to keep kind of taking it in and kind of how we're going to apply it to the fantasy. But the two tips I want to kind of leave you with is real quick is, number one, remember, fantasy football, week 1, week 2, it's going to be crazy. We're all experts. Dan and Chase are going to do their projections. They're going to have these awesome numbers they've been cranking up all summer long. They're going to be all ready to go week 1, roll them out there. And just to remind you guys, some of the things that we got to witness last year for week 1, just because it's football and you think you know it until you don't. Remember Matt Jones, guys? Matt Jones was QB2 week 1 last year. Where's Matt Jones? But he was QB2.
He's still QB2. Now he's QB2 in Jacksonville.
And week two's QB1, our favorite kicking boy, Daniel Jones. Danny Dimes had returned with 31 points.
My boy.
Then we also had a guy who was looking really good week one in running back position. Austin Eckler was back. He was tied with Christian McCaffrey at 24.4 points after week one. Tony Pollard had over 20 points, who we all now want to kick to the curb and we all hate for some reason other than some of us on this show. And some of our receivers who finished 3 and 4 that week were Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne. So just to remind you guys, fantasy football, week 1, week 2, don't assume, don't overreact to anything that you guys are going to see. Part of the reason I want you guys to understand scheme and know how things different apply, because people are going to throw all kinds of information at you after week 1, week 2, every week. And we want to be able to kind of cipher through the BS and be able to know what we want to know. So what I leave you guys with that final thing is don't overlook things, but don't overreact.
1000%, Chris. Absolutely. And when we talk about finding the edges, it's not about just, oh, this player X has a great matchup because this team has a bunch of, points given up to wide receivers or points given up to running. No, we're looking for schemes, how these teams are utilized, how the personnel groupings are utilized. You're looking for the edges. That's what you're looking for. Now, I know it's week 1, and I know everyone's in redraft league and, wanting to get their best balls out and seeing how everything's going to go. But we also have the Dynasty members who have spent the entire offseason putting their teams together. It's finally time to put their cards on the table and see the fruits of their labor. So now it's time for the Dynasty Temperature Check.
Hot and so hot in here.
Cool. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to talk about not your risers and fallers like every other show you're going to find on the internet talking about dynasty football or fantasy football in general, right? We're not just going to talk about the popular names. What we're going to talk about is what the data is actually showing us in terms of the guys who are actually being frequently traded, all right? So we're parsing through all of, Sleeper's trades, ESPN's trades, Yahoo's trades. We're looking through all of that and compiling the guys who are most often actually being traded. And for this to work, because I wanted to keep it consistent, I wanted to keep the values consistent. For the sake of this, we're doing exactly the format that we do on this show in redraft, except for in Dynasty, with the exception of I personally don't play Dynasty without a Superflex, so we did add Superflex. But we are going to be assuming a half-point PPR, 2 running backs, a couple receivers, a flex. Otherwise, yeah, we're good. All right, cool. Now that we have set this up, we're going to talk about our first player. You'll get the hang of it, and that is Zamir White. In half-point PPR Dynasty leagues, he is the most traded player over the last 30 days. And that was true when I checked on Monday. That is still true. All 3 of these guys are still true, although the third one was really close. It was by literally a handful of trades as the week progressed. But at any rate, Zamir White, most traded player over the last month. Currently, ECR, he has 27, RB 27 for the season, not for the weekly, but for the season, and was 106 total, or at the very least, again, when I checked on Monday. So forgive me if I'm off by a number or 2. Keep trade cut. He is minus 9 spots over the last month. So he is someone that, at least on the Keep Trade Cut platform, has dropped 9 spots amongst the running back rankings over the last month. So he's a guy who has fallen out of favor on that platform. Recent trades for Zamir White in the Dynasty landscape include, and I picked through some ones that were interesting on both up and below, guys, where I was like, wow, that's a lot for Zamir White, and wow, that's pretty cheap for Zamir White. A 2025 second-round pick, a 2025 third-round pick, Zamir White for Keon Coleman, Zamir White for Patrick Freiermuth, Zamir White for Najee Harris, and Zamir White for Baker Mayfield. And again, this is in a Superflex Dynasty half-point PPR league. Those are all real, genuine, one-for-one trades that have been made in leagues over the last month. Some context around Zamir White. He is on the most recent Raiders depth chart, going to be the starting running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I almost slipped up there as far as the location for the Raiders. But nonetheless, a lot of the question marks, a lot of the context around him is he that I've used this example before, but the Mike Davis of this year, right? Is he the guy where opportunity outweighs maybe talent, or is he genuinely earning the share of the offense that he is going to get? Because when you see those Mike Davis guys, sometimes, okay, I'm getting my 13 carries, but I don't get in the end zone, and I don't do enough to actually get you points, and you keep me in your lineup because you're like, I got 13 carries last week, but it's not amounting to anything, right? Or is he a guy that's actually going to get you value on the field? I think that's the question that a lot of fantasy managers are wrestling with right now. And I want to kick it to you guys. I've told you some recent trades. I've told you the context behind Zamir White. I'll finish it up. All four of us are going to speak on it, but just real quick, are you interested, going out of your way to buy Zamir White? Are you hearing out offers on him? Like, you're not against, getting a share of Zamir White, but you're not, outright looking for him? Or are you just declining things that are, Zamir White at market value if offered to you? And we'll start, Dan.
No, I'm hearing out. Look, as far as the trades that you listed, the only ones I'm not doing it for would be the 3rd round pick, Baker Mayfield and Pat Freiermuth. But I would jump at the heartbeat for a 2nd round pick for Keon Coleman, for Najee Harris. And I think one of the reasons why he's been slipping down the past month is because people are starting to realize, you know what, Zamir White, you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't catch the ball. All right, this is why I've been on Dylan Luabe as much as I have been. That's not what he does. We have a 4-game sample size of him getting 20 carries, and yes, he performed well during that time frame, but this is not a good offense, and he does not receive the football. It usually doesn't spell well long-term for Dynasty. So yes, I am definitely looking to trade Zamir White.
Chase, where are you at?
Yeah, I'm listening to offers. I'm not going out of my way to buy him, but I'm not necessarily tossing him, out there to the wolves either. I had to double check on my 20 Dynasty teams here. I only have him on 2 rosters here, and the 2 rosters that I have him on are ones where I'm kind of rebuilding a little bit. So I'm just kind of, he's a guy that I could have had, that I got to keep for cheap and could keep around. He is only 24. He's 24, which isn't young for a running back, but touches wise, he's young for a running back because he hasn't had a ton so far. He doesn't catch the football, or he hasn't to this point. But over those last 4 games last season, he did get 13 targets over those 4 games. So, I mean, starting to maybe get looked at a little bit more than he had in the past. He only had 5 targets up until week 14. And then those last 4 weeks, like I said, then once he cracked the starting lineup, they did look his way. I think he can do that. Whether or not they allow him to do that with Amir Abdullah still in the mix, with Dylan Luabe still coming on, like you said, is something to be, seen yet. I will listen to offers for him though. Zamir White for Najee Harris just seems like a nonsensical trade to me. It's like, this isn't real life. It's not like a change of scenery is going to do anybody any good. It's kind of a blah trade. Doing position for position straight up like that doesn't do anything for me. But I would listen to offers on him. I'm not actively searching him out unless, like I said, if he's going to come back as part of a trade, and I'm a rebuilding team, he's young enough. I can take him back in kind, as part of a trade possibly. But I'll listen to offers.
And Chris, where are we at?
Well, Chase forgot about Alexander Madison too, but no,
there's a reason for that.
I look at our situation. Look, he can be very effective in this offense. I think they're going to commit to him. He's more talented than Mike Davis. A guy I think that you see more comparison from my eyes is what you saw Deontay Foreman do for Chicago Bears last year with Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator. Foreman had a little stretch where he got to be the bell cow and looked pretty effective doing so. But what I wouldn't do, Adam, is I'm not going to overpay for him. So some of those deals, that, as Dan alluded to, the Keon Coleman, the 2nd rounders, I'm definitely pulling that trade all day, every day. But I also see that, according to you, he's a guy who's moving down. I think he's a polarizing player. And to Dan's point of him not being a pass catcher, this is a time that I'm taking advantage of people where they hate the non-pass catchers because they're not PPR machines. So we're just going to shit on them as much as we possibly can and keep pushing them down the board, pushing them down the board. So if it's a guy I can get for sweet value, that a guy I think is going to be the bell cow out back for most of the season. He reminds me more of a Dameon Pierce. So if you like Dameon Pierce, at least take a shot. I'm not a Dameon Pierce guy, but I think that you look at an offense that's going to be a run-first offense, and that's what he can be effective in.
Zamir White is not Jonathan Taylor, but remember, Jonathan Taylor couldn't catch a ball either. Nobody thought that he could out of college because they didn't throw to the flipping running back in Wisconsin. So just because he hasn't caught yet doesn't mean he necessarily can't. But they do have 2 pass-catching running backs on the roster that complicate things.
Yeah, that's the caveat right there. Thank you for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I think you guys hit the nail on the head. I think Zamir White is someone who I'm not necessarily desperately trying to sell, but I'm absolutely going to hear it out. Look, I even the other direction, I'd be intrigued to buy him in certain circumstances. If someone's valuing him more as a running back in the 30s than someone in the late 20s, then maybe there is a deal to be had there as far as actually acquiring Zamir White. But as far as Najee Harris or some of those other guys, like you were saying, I'm not necessarily as interested. Moving on to another.
Adam, real quick, before you move on to the next guy, we do have a question coming in from Fazo Land. Should I trade CMC? Now, I don't know if this, he didn't specify whether this is part of the Dynasty segment or not. We can maybe tackle this from both ways. But Fazo, should I trade CMC for DJ Moore and Jonathan Taylor? I already have Saquon Barkley. So I'll just tackle this from the redraft standpoint of it. No. CMC, if he's going to ride off into the sunset, this is the year for him to do it. Trent Williams is back in the building. He's number 1 overall pick for a reason. Jonathan Taylor, DJ Moore, not enough to entice me to do that from a redraft perspective. Now, Adam, I don't know if you want to tackle that from a dynasty perspective.
From a redraft perspective, I'm definitely with you. I'm keeping the elite talent. I think CMC is a win condition. And honestly, I think the value would be fine in Dynasty, but for me, if I already have Saquon and CMC, that feels like a hell of a running back duo, and I feel like I'm already competing for a championship. So I'm just going to go try to win right now rather than worrying about what's down the road, unless my wide receiver room is completely toasted, and then maybe I have some DJ Moore conversation, because I do really love DJ Moore.
You'd have to
If you've
be
been listening for the last couple weeks, you know that.
We got one more coming in from George Play. A redraft 12-team non-PPR. I have Murray and Cousins. Should I drop Cousins for Ray Davis or Jordan Mason? Chris, you want to tackle that one?
I think that depends on what your running back depth looks like situation. If you have depth, I wouldn't necessarily do that. But if you don't have depth and you want to have some upside, I would pull the trigger. There's probably other quarterbacks available that have similar upsides. Kirk Cousins, Ray Davis, and Jordan Mason are really good handcuffs that you can get your hands on, especially early on. Ray Davis having an easy schedule versus Arizona, you might see him blow up early, so you want to get your hands on him early if you can.
You got till week 11 to figure out a backup quarterback too. You don't need 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah,
you've got Kyler Murray. You don't need 2 quarterbacks.
You guys hit the nail on the head. We do have a couple more questions coming in. Guys, hang on. Adam, I want you to move on with your segment. We'll get back to the guys with the questions coming in. But keep them coming. We love it.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Please do, keep interacting with us. We love to have comments and talk to you guys on the show. So my next running back, the next most traded player, and again, that has held true throughout the week. So second most traded player within half-point PPR Superflex dynasties over the last month is Cleveland running back Jerome Ford. And I was curious how things would go for him over the last month, right? Because the Nick Chubb situation is becoming a lot more clear as to how much time he may potentially miss. Now there's certainly some variables there still, but we at least know this first 4 weeks. We at least know that it's going to be a slow process for him. Things of that nature. So with Jerome Ford set to at least start the season, and look, Jerome Ford was the guy who came in for Nick Chubb at the last season when Chubb got hurt. So we actually have a little bit of understanding of what this looks like with him as the running back, right? He had 12 starts last season for the Cleveland Browns. He had 200 carries, 800 yards, 4 touchdowns. And look, he was a solid fill-in running back for you in some situations. He is a guy who is currently the running back 41 in the ECR, at least again what was as of Monday, and player overall 151 on Keep Trade Cut. And you see kind of the ramifications of learning a little bit more about Nick Chubb. I think some people were getting excited over the offseason, just falling in love with the name of Nick Chubb, not necessarily, knowing exactly what our timetables were going to look like for this upcoming season. There were definitely reports early in the summer. Nick Chubb could be back week 1, and that could was holding a lot of weight, right? Because we all knew that was incredibly unlikely. But people might have gotten a little too optimistic with Nick Chubb, so you're seeing the market correct a little bit with Jerome Ford. So he has moved up 4 spots on Keep Trade Cut over the last month, and some recent trades. So he's valued, 14 spots less than Zamir White. The trades, at least as far as draft picks, aren't incredibly dissimilar, which is interesting. So we've seen a 2026 as opposed to the 2025, a 2026 second-round pick for Jerome Ford. We've seen a 2025 third-round pick for Jerome Ford. We've seen Marquise Hollywood Brown go for Jerome Ford. We've seen Aaron Rodgers for Ford. We've seen Luke McCaffrey, and we've seen Jake Ferguson for Jerome Ford. So again, Jerome Ford is someone who we're going to see start for at least the first month of the season. And he has performed all right as the Cleveland starter before. He wasn't especially dominant from a fantasy perspective, but a 4 yards per carry runner who can be trusted. He can catch a little bit. He can run okay. There's nothing game breaking with him. But we know he's the guy, and we've seen some of the competition behind him kind of take a step back, and that it is going to be him at least as the starter. So again, and we'll start with you, Chris. Is he someone you're buying? Is he someone you're hearing out, or is this a guy that you're completely out on?
Well, it's not a guy I'm completely out on. I like Jerome Ford's talent. Is a guy that I would definitely, but is a guy that I will listen to offers on. We talked about some of the 2026 pick. If I'm looking to get some picks down the road, or I want to kind of people are undervaluing because so far down the road, I want to kind of take advantage of that if I can. The running back, especially, that has a limited shelf life. But I will shop around at him too to see if I can get him on cheap, because he is somebody who I think is going to be around most of the season, if not the entire season. Look, Nick Chubb will come back and be healthy. You still think Jerome Ford is going to be mixed in there, because we can't expect Nick Chubb to come out there and get 30 carries off the bat or be a bell cow back. So we had to see that kind of remains. Jerome Ford is a guy that they seem to kind of prioritize. I'm not worried about Pierre Strong. I'm not worried about Deontay Foreman. So it's a guy that I would try to get my hands on, but I'm not paying too much necessarily to get my hands on him.
And Chase?
Oh, I'm buying the hell out of Jerome Ford. He's a guy that I have on a full quarter of my dynasty teams here. He's a guy that I had been targeting for the last year or two here, knowing that Chubb would be approaching. Well, I'll keep talking to you guys anyway. Knowing that Nick Chubb was going to be approaching that running back threshold here. Nick Chubb is 28 years old, and he's coming off his 87th catastrophic leg injury of his life. Jerome Ford, 24 years old, like you said, wasn't spectacular. He didn't shatter the ceiling there last year when he took over for Chubb, but he was the guy they went to. They felt comfortable enough that they're going to make him the starter again this year while Chubb is out. It's a team that wants to run the ball. I know they paid Deshaun Watson more money than any human being should ever be paid in their lifetime, but this team that wants to run the football, and when they run the football, they're going to hand it to Jerome Ford. We've talked about previously on this show that we don't necessarily think Ford goes away even when Chubb does come back. Now, I love Chubb late season, but I agree that I think Ford continues to have a role all season, and Nick Chubb's future is in doubt in Cleveland, not just because of the injury, but because of his age here. So Jerome Ford is a guy in Dynasty that I am happy to get my hands on for the right price. I am not going to overpay for him, but if somebody wants me to give a second round pick 2 years away for a guy that could be the starter on a good offense here in Cleveland, I'll make that trade. We tend to overvalue picks, I think, in the Dynasty. Outside of the first round, we tend to overvalue picks in the Dynasty world, and I'm happy to give that up for a quantity like Jerome Ford that I know on a good offense.
Cool. And on to Dan.
Yeah, I'm Chase. You said it. Chubb is in danger of not just because of his age, not just because of his injury, but he's a free agent after this year. He might not even be on the Browns anyway. I know Jerome Ford doesn't tickle people pink, with his ability. It's kind of one of those guys who he's good at everything, but not spectacular at any one thing. But what he is better at is being a 3-down back and being involved in the passing game.
Being healthy.
And that's what I'm not even talking about healthy, but that's what they brought Ken Dorsey in to do. All the talk this offseason has been all about how we are curtailing the offense of Deshaun Watson, whatever arm he has left. So I think this is going to benefit Jerome Ford. It was a hell of an injury Nick Chubb suffered. I don't know if we are going to get to see Nick Chubb actually be able to make a true, genuine return or not. That's something that remains to be seen. And I wouldn't be surprised if he really wasn't able to do so. So Jerome Ford, if this is all it takes for me to get Jerome Ford right now, I'm pulling the trigger because it's not just this year. It is potentially next year when you're still paying him on a rookie deal that you're going to have him be the starting running back. This is the thing for the future, especially from a dynasty perspective. Not sure what's going on with Adam, but while we wait to see if he could try to get back in, we did have a couple of questions anyway from the viewers. So Bazambo, should I trade Garrett Wilson and Brock Bowers for Puka and Trey McBride? He did go on to say this is a redraft league trade, not a dynasty trade. So big blockbuster deal here. What would you do, Chase?
Oh, I'd jump on that, Shiz. I would jump on that. Listen, Trey McBride could be the second. We all assume that Mr. Harrison is going to be the lead dog there in the passing attack in Arizona, but Trey McBride is the leading returner from last year's offense, and Trey McBride is going to eat in that offense. I love Trey McBride there over Brock Bowers, who we don't know necessarily how full of a role he's going to be in that offense. We know he's a good player, but they still have Devontae Adams, who is going to demand the ball. They still have Jacoby Myers. They still have, honestly, at the same position technically that Brock Bowers plays, they still have Michael Mayer there too. Not to mention, like we just talked about, their running back room. In terms of the receiver, Garrett Wilson for Puka. I love Garrett Wilson, but I still like Puka. They're both number one receivers. You're trading a number one receiver for a number one receiver, and you're trading a possibly number two or unknown quantity at tight end for a surefire number one tight end. I would take the Puka Trey McBride side of this all day long.
All right, Chris. How about Zulu here asking, start Evan Ingram or Chris Godwin in the flex?
Yeah, Evan Ingram's got actually a nice matchup versus Miami this week. So I could understand the temptation, but I'm going to go with Chris Godwin, returning back to the slot receiver position, a guy that Baker Mayfield can get reattached to, can look forward to slot versus Washington secondary is questionable at best. So I like Chris Godwin this week.
Yeah, go with the higher volume. With Evan Ingram, we wait for the receivers to get hurt before he gets this higher volume later on in the season. Plus, as a tight end, wide receivers definitely have much more of an upside unless you're talking about Travis Kelce or Sam Laporta. On that note, it's time for Big Time Bet. All right, I got some bets for you guys. Got some player props to kick this thing off. And I decided to load up my 3 players I wanted to give to you for the next 2 games, Thursday night and Friday night, because I'm just too excited. I had to look into the first games of the week. So my biggest ones here. We got Josh Jacobs on a parlay bet here right off the rip. I love that this is on Underdog, by the way, the pick'ems. 2.5 receptions, 16.5 receiving yards. Marshawn Lloyd, don't know if he's going to play. Don't think he's going to play. Even if he does play, how effective is he going to be after he missed weeks and weeks of practice with a hamstring injury? In fact, Josh Jacobs is the only running back on the depth chart of the Packers right now who's not injured at the moment. I think Josh Jacobs is going to get his fair share of catches. I'm taking a same game parlay of over 2.5 receptions and 16.5 receiving yards. On the flip side, we got Patrick Mahomes. He's playing tomorrow night. His line is at 1.5 passing touchdowns against the Ravens. The Ravens have a great defense, but Mahomes has torn them up in his career. Just looking at the regular season, 4 games played, he's averaged 369 passing yards and 3 touchdowns in each of those 4 regular season matchups in his career. I love Mahomes over his 1.5 passing touchdown mark in Thursday Night Football. Oh, and we got Jalen Hurts too, by the way, over just a half rushing touchdown, just one rushing touchdown. We just need one. That's it. What's all we need. Oh, and by the way, 36.5 rushing yards. You know what the Packers don't do defensively? They don't take away the mobile quarterback rushing. In fact, they allowed the 4th most rushing yards to the quarterback last season. Jalen Hurts has averaged 93 rushing yards against the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, that's right. We are taking Jalen Hurts on the over there. And with that,
you had to rub that in. Thank you.
I did just a little bit. We're gonna take a break. I'm gonna stop coughing, and then we got our big last segment. We are here. FantasySportsAdvice.com, offering the best fantasy sports social media platform. Why join endless Discord communities or the trolls of Reddit? Fantasy Sports Advice is a community designed to help you win with 24/7 support. Go to FantasySportsAdvice.com and become a pro member for unlimited access. Again, go to FantasySportsAdvice.com today.
And I'll crush you like a paper cup.
All right, it's time for Crush and Bust. These are going to be the players that we like. Maybe a tier or 2 or more above ECR for our crush. And then a bust is going to be the opposite way. The players that are getting hyped up, that you should be locked in. Maybe they're wide receiver 2s. Maybe they're RB2s. Maybe they're RB1s, but wide receiver 1s. And we're saying, no. Look out this week. Maybe even think about a different option. So first, we're going to start with the crush side. And I want to go to Adam first. So Adam, this week, who are people too low on, in your opinion, that you have a crush on for this matchup?
Look, this is a guy who I maybe wasn't as high as I thought I was early on the offseason. You know, after talking to you guys, I had to reconsider, kind of move off of some of my biases. Now, coming into week 1, looking at the situation, you know, looking at all I have in front of me, man, I'm really excited for Tony Pollard this week. He has become kind of late in the season one of my very favorite, you know, if I did not go running back early, he's been a guy who I've been, you know, of those late round dart throws that I really liked this season. So I'm excited for him. And this season, or this week rather, in particular, we're going against a Bears defense who, listen, they are much improved over the first part of last year. Let's give the Chicago Bears a lot of credit in that, okay? A lot of that improvement was against the pass. Let's be super clear about that. The overall defense improved, but the major improvements were against the pass. The pass rush had a night and day difference. The secondary had a night and day difference. The interior defensive line is still the weak point on this defense. Let's just be clear about that. This was last season, over the course of the season, and again, they got better down the stretch, but over the course of the season, they were the 30th ranked rush defense on PFF, and look, I think they're going to improve from that, but come on, like what we're valuing Tony Pollard as an RB3 type of guy, I'm sorry, like even I like Tyjae Spears. I think he's an incredibly talented and incredibly explosive back, but let's be real with ourselves. If Tyjae Spears takes this backfield, it's going to be the second half of the season. Week 1, are you kidding me? Tony Pollard's going to be the guy. Like let's be real about that. And let's be real about week 1. Look, I think the Chicago Bears defense, I think they're going to continue to improve, but they're not going to be an elite rush defense unit week 1. So with that, those two things in mind, Tony Pollard is someone who I could easily see being a late to mid RB2 this upcoming week.
Yeah, us as a group, this show's a group. We've been the minority, but we have been on Tony Pollard from the get-go. And follow the money. Tony Pollard was paid to lead this backfield. Tyjae Spears is going to have his role. I'm not saying he's going to dissipate, and this is totally Tony Pollard from last year where he was a featured bell cow. But Adam, I'm with you. He is the lead guy in this backfield. He is a year removed from his injury, which did take away some of his explosiveness that we're used to seeing. Yeah, people are going to be surprised by Tony Pollard. Chris, who's your big crush in week 1?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Khalil Shakir versus Arizona. I think this Arizona defense is not good. I think Buffalo has every reason to try to go out and put as many points on the board as possible. I think they're going to try to.
They're going to be able to do it against?
Pretty much. I think this is where they're going to shoot their load, possibly, or overreact to it. Think that, Buffalo is going to be awesome, but it's a game where I think Khalil Shakir is going to be able to get tons of targets. He's going to get moved around. This Arizona secondary has very little to stop him. They have no pass rush at all. So I think this is going to be a fun game in a sense for the Buffalo Bills. Khalil Shakir is a guy that I think is going to go out there and just run easily into 100 yards and probably score a touchdown as well. It's a guy that I think is criminally undervalued this week. I love Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, I think we are going to see Shakir, not Curtis Samuel, is going to be ahead in that pecking order of target distribution for the Buffalo Bills. Can't wait for that one. Chase, who do you got?
I'm going to stick around in that same game there on the same side of the field. I'm going to go with James Cook there from the Buffalo Bills. Listen, the Cardinals were one of the worst teams in the league against opposing running backs last season. Sharp Football has them as the league's worst front seven against the, so against the run, they're not going to be good at all. They lost BJ Ojolari. That didn't help anything on that front. Even if Ray Davis is the goal line back for Buffalo, the Cardinals are bad enough. Cook could score through the air. He can score from farther out on the ground. I'm not worried necessarily about Davis taking goal line carries because I still think James Cook is going to get his in this game. I expect him to eat the rest of the time. Right now in half PPR, he's running back 13 ECR wise. I have him as a top 12 play this week. I really like James Cook this week against the Cardinals.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this. Like, I just think it's funny. All these people are talking about the Cardinals could be like a wild playoff team. And I'm like, look, I know offensively there's some things to get excited about, but listen to what we're saying here. The defense is ripe for the picking for everybody.
They're going to have to win every game 38-35.
Yeah, it ain't gonna happen. I'm here to tell you that right now. All right, so my guy, I talked about him a little bit earlier. I didn't want to get into him because I had to get into him here, and that's my man, Scary Terry McLaurin. I got him ranked at wide receiver 20. Lock him in as a must-play wide receiver 2. While meanwhile, ECR's got him all the way back sitting there at wide receiver 28. Look, last year, Tampa Bay gave up the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receivers. And now you have Zion McCollum replacing Carlton Davis. Who? Yeah, thank you. Like, exactly. Look, you're going to be able to pass on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers all you want to this year. In fact, PFF has this wide receiver cornerback matchup graded at a 66.4, which is well above average for wide receivers. Now, on top of it, you look at Terry McLaurin, who I know he hasn't played a game yet, but Jaden Daniels, the best quarterback Terry McLaurin has ever had at his disposal, period. Number one, had a 23% target share last season. I expect that to get a boost. Jahan Dotson got shipped off. We don't know between, Diami Brown, Alameda Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, who's a later round rookie. Who the hell else is catching the ball? All right, it's going to be Jaden Daniels getting locked in to Scary Terry, who can actually throw the deep ball. Finally, Terry McLaurin can open it up down the field. I'm locking him in as a wide receiver 2. You must play this week against Tampa Bay. Now, with that, on the flip side here, we got busts. Who do we want to stay away from? That maybe everybody else will start looking playing their lineups, or at least think about a different option. Adam, back to you. What do you got?
And look, it pains me to say it because this is a player who I love and a guy who, look, in Dynasty, I love this guy, but Brandon Ayuk, week 1, redraft. I'm sorry. He's in ECR, latest ECR, half-point PPR. He's wide receiver 25, so highest end wide receiver 3, but flirting with wide receiver 2. I'm sorry. I have him as a low-end wide receiver 2. It's someone who, like, look, if I am particularly stacked at wide receiver, I would consider pushing down. I love him, but the matchup is not one that I necessarily want to go after. Of the starting wide receivers for the 49ers, Debo certainly plays at 10% higher in the slot. Ayuk is out wide 75% of the time. Ayuk he's going to be the perimeter wide receiver. That means Sauce Gardner is going to be seeing a lot of Brandon Ayuk. And, I'm sorry. We have 2 practices from Brandon Ayuk this season. This season, we have 2 practices. But
he has a left tackle.
Look, he has a left tackle, and that's fantastic. And he has Christian McCaffrey. But look, that's just not where I want to be attacking the Jets in general. I think in general, this would be a poor matchup for him. And that's ignoring, once again, He has to go against Sauce Gardner. And look, I'm sure he's been practicing up against some great, XFL corners on that press release. He's not ready for Sauce Gardner in press week 1. He's not ready for those hand fights. I'm sorry. He's just not. Like, that's just the reality. He hasn't been getting warm-ups against real NFL cornerbacks like that. Like, that's the reality of the situation. He may even be in great shape, but it's super technical out there and against a really, really good cornerback on the outside who's been sharpening iron, going against Garrett Wilson all offseason long. I'm sorry. I love Ayuk. I hope by a month from now I'm not worried about this, but week 1, I absolutely am.
Adam,
Chris, that rant gave you a run for your money, Chris. That was.
Oh, he's on it. He should. He should off-season observations.
Well, Adam, I'll do you one better. I got Brandon Ayuk down at wide receiver 30 for this week, so like he's purely like a flex play if you don't have a better option, in my opinion. So I'm right there with you. Chris, you got a surprising one for this week.
He is a player that I like and I've been advocating for most of the summer because people have been down on him, but I think this is a guy that I do not trust week 1. That's DeAndre Swift. Taking on a Tennessee defense, I think it's improved, but one thing I'm just going to highlight is they don't necessarily improve versus a run because they were fantastic versus a run. Tennessee's a team that's going to be able to dominate the line of scrimmage. Jonathan Simmons, they brought in the kid Sweat this year. They have good linebackers they've added. I think this team's going to have a really hard time. Chicago's going to have a really hard time trying to run the ball, establish the run, especially if they're, Shane Waldron doesn't realize that you can't run the ball up the middle, which he tried to do a lot in Seattle. He's got to realize to run off tackle. So this is not a good matchup for Tennessee. For DeAndre Swift versus Tennessee. I like DeAndre Swift going for the rest of the season, just not week 1.
Okay. Yeah, Tennessee, the run defense is real. I'm with you on that one. The run defense is going to be real this year. They got some big bodies up front. Chase, spicy. Chase has got a spicy one for his bus this week.
All right. So now listen, I realize that if you drafted Jahmyr Gibbs as you drafted him as your running back 1, in all likelihood, unless you went crazy running back round 1 and round 2 and got lucky. But Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy I think you need to temper your expectations for in this opening week. And here's why. Now, this Rams defense that he's going against here, that is a bold statement. But on this Rams defense he's going to face on Sunday night, they may be absolutely abysmal this year. They were not great last year. They're not going to be good this year. But I worry because of that, the Lions with their high-powered offense, holy cow, that's not a bad observation there. I worry that the Lions might jump out to a big enough lead that they might be in clock killer mode for a pretty good portion of this game. And if that's the case, I think it limits Gibbs' upside. Now, we know that, no, he can run between the tackles and everything. What they're going to do is they're going to run the ball more often with Montgomery in those kinds of situations. They're going to use Gibbs more as a playmaker. And I don't think that favors Gibbs' upside in this game. You're still playing him. You drafted him to play him. You're not going to not play him, but you need to temper your expectations. So you may need to look elsewhere in your lineup to help make up the points that I don't think you're going to get from him at that running back 1 level. He's not a top 10 play for me this week. So, like I said, you're going to start him. You should start him. Temper your expectations. Look elsewhere in your lineup to make up some of those points there.
I mean, Montgomery's going to be a thorn in Jahmyr Gibbs' side, especially inside the 5.
They're a thorn in each other's side. I mean, if either one of them misses any time, the other one skyrockets to the moon. But yeah.
But the Rams defense stinks. And this is a game that I expect to be very, very high scoring. So I don't know. That's a little spicy for me as far as Jahmyr Gibbs not having the ceiling in that one. But okay, Chase, making the argument there. For me, my bust this week is DJ Moore. Okay. ECR's got him locked in as wide receiver 19. So they're telling you he's a locked in top 20 must play wide receiver. And frankly, I got him at wide receiver 26. Is he most likely making my lineup at wide receiver 26? Yes, but it might be more as a flex play. It might be more of a question mark depending upon what options I have available to me. Talking about the Titans defense, Chris, because you talked about DeAndre Swift. This is not the same Titans defense of last year here, people. They signed L'Jarius Sneed. They have Denard Wilson, who's now the new defensive coordinator after he was the Ravens defensive backs coach last year. A defensive back unit, by the way, that outside of Kyle Hamilton, vastly overachieved. All right. That is not that talented of a group. And they were able to go lights out against some of the best offenses in the NFL the entire season. I'm excited for him as a defensive coordinator. I even like Awuzie, who they brought on the other side to be able to make this system. He's not a bad backside corner in this one either. Tennessee Titans are not going to be a defense that are ripe for the picking. I don't think people realize this. And we still need to see the target distribution. Is DJ Moore going to be the first read more times not in that Chicago offense? Yes, absolutely. Is he going to be the only read like he was last year for Justin Fields? No, he's not going to be. You're going to have Keenan Allen. You're going to have Roma Dunza. You're going to have DeAndre Swift coming out of the backfield. You're going to have Cole Kmet. And frankly, to start off this season, I'm not too crazy about Caleb Williams this particular week because we still haven't seen him really get into a rhythm where he's dropping back 2 steps, 3 steps, and firing off the ball. He's still doing a lot more improvisation. I think that's going to be tough against a defense that has talent like this one has a system that Denard Wilson is going to be running. It's going to be a little confusing. I think he's going to be under pressure quite often in this one. I don't expect a great showing from the Chicago offense in general. I expect this to be a very low scoring game. In fact, I even have the under for this one, and it's at 45.5. So I'm just capping my ceiling on DJ Moore this week. He's a wide receiver 3 for me. With that, we close off our first week of Operation Domination. Before we get out of here, Adam had this great suggestion. It is week 1. So let's go ahead and just go around the room, rapid fire, pick your Super Bowl teams and winner for the year. Chase, go.
Kansas City versus Detroit finally, but Kansas City makes the three-peat.
Ooh, Adam.
Unfortunately, I had the same thought as San Francisco and Detroit. Or Detroit and the Chiefs, sorry.
Chris, what do you got?
I said off season, if you give Patrick Mahomes, Marquise Brown, like the Chiefs are going to win it all, but everybody's been picking Kansas City. So I'm going to just switch it up and I'm going to go Baltimore versus the Eagles.
Ooh, Baltimore versus. Guys, the best roster in football is San Francisco. San Francisco is going back to the Super Bowl. Just FYI, just so everybody knows. But they are not going to be facing the Kansas City Chiefs. They're going to be facing the Houston Texans. I love what they did in the offseason. That defense is going to be better than people realize. They have the trio of weapons and Joe Mixon and CJ Stroud going the second year. I have Texans in San Francisco. And because it's not Patrick Mahomes, San Francisco finally wins. Okay, and on that,
hey, the internet is forever, Dan. That's out there.
Goodbye. See you guys next week. Make sure you follow Operation Domination on the Fantasy Football Advice Network on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcast app. Make sure you sign up for the Fantasy Sports Vice platform because it's 24/7 fantasy football community. Let's go, baby. We'll see you next week. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.